what happened. So it was trying to restart the machine apparently. So let's move quickly into where we will. Can everyone who is here hear me? Just confirm. Great. All right. So I'll just move the presentation quickly along. So as I was saying, I'm not going to use the camera again, just in the event we have a problem. As I was indicating before, this is International Year of Small and Developing States, as indicated by the UN. And the links I've posted in the chat, which should still be there. If not, I'll send them separately. Give you an idea of what's happening in 2014, including a conference, which is unfortunately happening at the same time as the IGF. It's happening from September 1 to 4, 2014 in Samoa during the IGF, unfortunately. But in the link I shared with you, I shared the zero draft of the paper that's being, outcome documents being delivered. And there are several highlighted items related to ICT, although not internet specifically. So based upon that, we do have the small and developing states treating with ICT issues, and to a large extent, that's the main issue before we even reach the internet, and that's the point I wanted to raise today. So those who are online, and those who may or may not have seen this presentation before, we'll just quickly go through who the small and developing states are. For those who are in the SIDS themselves, please bear with me as I indicate to others where we are located. Go on to my next slide. So where are the SIDS? So there are 52 small and developing states currently recognized by the UN, both at the level of UN member states. There are 38 of them, as well as non-member states, who are of which there are 14, but all are recognized by the United Nations High Office on looking at these SIDS, as well as lesser developed countries and landlocked countries. Where are they located? Well, who are the SIDS in its characteristics? The last numbers we have, there are 63.2 million small and developing states with a GDP of $500 billion and growing, well, 600 billion and growing US dollars, that is. Their population growth is 1.3%. Some interesting figures here is that approximately 10% of the population lives below sea level in effect. So as you would hear about in World Environment Day on June 5th, which is being also celebrated in Barbados as the host country, climate change and coastal erosion and so on are major issues for small and developing states that do not affect other countries as obviously, except those who live in coastal areas. The larger countries don't have that much of their population living below sea level. There are other problems that SIDS face in relation to foreign direct investment, mortality rates, and so on. And really and truly, the issue regarding to small and developing states is their position in the world related to how can they continue developing in the face of global economic change, global environmental change, and the issues that are being addressed today attempt to position them in the world beyond basically islands. So can small and developing states be seen as islands or countries who can really reach out and perform economically and otherwise? And there's been some SIDS, Malta, Singapore, and so on, who have managed to break out of the stereotype, if you want to call it that, or the label of developing states, and of course achieve some level of developed status beyond the economic figures. Where are they located? Well, primarily across the large water spaces. What I did here is I took one of those maps that's the source there and turned the world upside down and using South America, Australia, top of the world to show a better view of where the islands are located. They're located primarily in the Pacific, in the Indian Ocean, and the Atlantic Ocean as well. So off the coast of the major continents, off the coast of the Asian continent, off the coast of the African continent, and off the coast of the North American and South American continent, which would really be the Caribbean area in that scenario. So they're hardly seen visibly unless you are flying directly over them, or you see a map looking like this. And here's another view using a more traditional map view, where you see them scattered in the large ocean spaces in the world. These are some views of the island specifically with a zoom in. You can see on the top left, Western Samoa, Tonga, Niue. On the right of that, you see the one just on the coast of Africa, Maldives, Seychelles, Comoros, Mauritius. And on the bottom of that right, some of the Pacific, a few of the Pacific's very small islands, Micronesia, Marshall Islands, Tuvalu, Fiji, and so on. And then in the middle to lower part, the Caribbean islands. So what are the issues and challenges facing small developing states? Well, as I hinted at earlier, we are focused primarily on issues with our vulnerability. So in effect, as I hinted at with regards to climate change, small and developing states can at any moment have a natural disaster or some sort of event that could effectively obliterate the entire population. And that's not an overstatement, that is actually the truth. And in some cases, can obliterate large portions of the island, or cities on the island, or towns on the island. We have very clear memories of the Boxing Day 2004, I believe, tsunami in the Asia Pacific islands regarding Indonesia, Bali, and I forget the other one, the major islands, even Sri Lanka would have been caught in that. And more recently, we had the Haiti earthquake, which obliterated almost the entire Port-au-Prince capital. So you could see that single events can obliterate islands like that. We also have hurricanes and cyclones, which can obliterate islands. We really had a very serious issue a few years ago, and even for Jamaica. And years gone, we've had where islands, economies, and cities and towns have been decimated by a single event that can last, in some cases, seconds, in other cases, minutes, or in other cases, hours. So there are not many places in the world, in other countries, where something like that can happen and be so devastating to those economies and the peoples of the world with such a large lost population, highly vulnerable. And of course, economically, they're also highly vulnerable. They tend to be dependent on the larger countries, the metropole, North America, Europe, and in some cases even Asia, on their economies, large trading partners. And without those trading partners, they tend to have challenges with regards to the economic balance sheet. And when those economies are in trouble, they also feel the effects, and probably even more significantly, because they reduce their imports from the larger countries, and therefore their exports are reduced, and their main source of income is reduced. So when you see the World Bank indicate to the world that some SIDS GDPs have gone up and the per capita income has gone up, in many cases those figures are snapshots in time, and that's something that I've been trying to indicate to many of the economists, that they're snapshots in time and they're very cyclical. So in one case where it may have gone up, and by the next day it's gone down. So you can't use those figures as snapshots or areas where you can strictly measure the development of the small islands. Of course, based upon the economic challenges and even climate change, we do have a lot of social and economic impacts that will affect small developing states as other countries in the world. Again, disproportionate impacts in terms of social deviance, social dislocation, crime and deviance, issues related to poor roads, poor infrastructure, including the ICT infrastructure, poverty, and disproportionate dependence on state welfare strategies. And these are the things that really create internal problems for the small developing states that many countries in the world are not so much aware of at this point in time. In terms of internet governance, well, before 2003, internet governance was not really a big issue in the SIDS. We would have had a few of the islands probably taking leadership positions in the WSIS or pre-WSIS preparation, but not many. And generally speaking, you tend to find monopolistic infrastructure in those small islands, weak, poor access, high profit share, profit making multinationals working in the islands on their own. And the legislative policy environment was very weak as well, not supporting deregulation. Again, the internet infrastructure, the critical internet infrastructure was quite weak and not extremely supportive of development of telecoms. We would have had a very low indigenous ICT industrial development. Government's use of ICT was very, very weak and low as well. State-sponsored ICT would have not been something that you would have seen or heard about in many of these small islands pre-2000, in the 1990s and so on, leading to what I call additional canyon. So you'd have had those who had access would have had access, very good access, and those who didn't. The many who didn't had zero access, actually no access at all, in some cases not even dial-up. So you'd have found challenges both in terms of access to technology, access to communications, and not even computers being available. Post 2003, well, the opposite has begun to happen. The major issue has been the liberalization of the telecommunications sector. So what you would have found was that at least two operators in all the islands started to emerge, in some cases three, and in other cases four. What is very intriguing is that in many of these small islands, across the various geographic regions, they are very similar operators with similar owners operating, which I myself find very intriguing. I don't want to name them on this webinar, but it's very intriguing that there seems to be some targeting of these nations by particular operators. Of course, as an island nation, island state, there are challenges with access in terms of getting access to the last mile. How do you get access across a small island with the least amount of expenditure to make it economically feasible? And we tend to find that mobile internet and mobile wireless penetration has been the way that has happened in most of the small islands. The larger ones, you have, of course, fiber. But in the much smaller islands, fiber would not be something that would be primary source of connectivity, given its cost and its cost to get out of the ground or on the overhead lines. We'd have had increased private sector investments, increased public-private partnerships based upon what I indicated before, the multinationals who were investing, looking at new opportunities in these areas and seeing perhaps some greenfield markets to invest in. Larger governmentalization of internet and ICT, and critically in many cases, international grant funding and loan funding for expansion of broadband and internet access, and digital divide initiatives, at least inclusion initiatives in these islands through all the banks that I am quoting here as well as others. Another interesting scenario that has emerged is the IXP proliferation, which has begun in the island states, which tends to be sold on the concept of local content generation and reduction of telecommunication costs through different pairing arrangements. The larger importance of CCTLDs and renewed interest in the CTTLDs and GTLDs based upon ICANN's recent move towards a new GTLD program. We've seen some efforts in the small island states to really get involved in that discussion. And we've also had CCTLDs such as Tuvalu and Federated States of Micronesia emerge as major players in the GTLD space, actually. As you know, Tuvalu is .tv and .fm would have been the Federated States of Micronesia. And as you might be aware, they're reasonably well utilized by other non-CCTLD type users. In one case television, the other case FM radio. You've seen as well, of course, the units of Web 2.0 type environments, cloud computing, and the of the apps economy, as well as, of course, large youth populations that would be utilizing the internet and ancillary applications as we move forward. In the Caribbean, there's a Internet Governance Policy Framework paper, which I think is very useful. I've listed a code there, a link that you can visit at the CTU website, perhaps for those who are looking for some ideas of what the challenges for internet governance in a small and developing state. This does a nice job of giving a clean review of the issues that we face and how we can perhaps resolve them. And having shown it to my colleagues in the Pacific, they do seem to think that it's something that can be spread across beyond the Caribbean into at least the Pacific region. So I encourage you all to have a look at it and see what learnings we can make and take away from it. So NETmundial in April 2014 was a pretty landmark occurrence for small and developing states. In that, many small and developing states were aware of what was happening, and some of them actually took part in the process to try and get recognition and try and get their issues raised. One of the major thrusts that were attempted was to actually get the naming of small and developing states into the draft outcome document. And I'm referring here to a couple of comments that came in. One specifically called out, which is an amalgamated comment on the what does multi-stakeholder mean, and a reference to small and developing states was pulled out as a call-out comment. Of course, the speaker, I made my own observation, which was also incorporated to that call-out comment, as you can see there. In addition to that, at NETmundial, UNESCO Deputy Director General actually referred to small and developing states in his welcome remarks as an area that needed to be put into the document, and referred to its submission to treat with that issue, given UNESCO is one of the major players in this process. This was a very, very powerful endorsement of small and developing nations to be part of the NETmundial process, and obviously to have it referred to in the document. And my country, the Republic of Trinidad, who also participated at NETmundial, went to the mic and actually made a specific comment on including the wording small and developing states into the document as well. And their reference was to change the roadmap as opposed to the principles document. So from both angles, from both the principles and the roadmap, there was support for including reference to small and developing states, which have been pretty landmark in the scheme of things. What actually happened, though, in the lobbying and negotiations, where we wanted to put small and developing states, as I indicate here, did not happen in the way we expected it. So, as I'm showing on this slide, we expected it to go in that reference to all stakeholders in the multi-stakeholder model. Unfortunately, did not go into there, as well as the meaningful participation we wanted to add in here as well, to refer specifically to small and developing states, even though developing countries obviously would have incorporated all of those issues, but we want a specific reference to censor at this point as well. Where the actual reference came in was in the roadmap document for the future evolution of IG. And the reason why I make a distinction between the principles and the roadmap is that the roadmap can, of course, always be looked at as a future state and can be deferred many times over. As those who know how these documents work, any future statement can always be deferred to the future. And the key of putting sense into the principles documents have it being dealt with as the forefront. Unfortunately, the lobbying was not successful to have it into the principles area. However, there was a mention of it in the roadmap. So work now is to try and bring the wording from the roadmap into the principles area as well, and have it being dealt with primarily in discussions going forward as an issue. So I'm going to skip through this given the time because I need to get some questions from you guys. So I'm just going to skip. The presentation will be made available to you. And I wanted to just focus on the IGF. So in terms of the IGF, as some of you know, the Internet Society of Trinidad and Tobago has been attempting to create a SIDS platform, and it has evolved over the last 2-3 years into a round table. So in 2012, we did have a specific workshop on small and developing states. In 2013, we moved it from the issues into dealing with one of the issues raised in 2012, and it's a round table environment that was in Bali. And 2014, we've just got approval for our workshop on, which is a very key question that I hinted at earlier. Do the elements required to promote the information society knowledge economy complement basic infrastructural development needs? And that is something that we have approved now to move forward with. And I would hope to see many of you either in person or remotely in Istanbul as we have that roundtable in 2014 to discuss critical issues to small developing states and hopefully share with, as you can see in the photo I included, a large island developing state or developed state, Australia, Fairland and all, who joined us to reflect on the fact that in island states, including Australia, New Zealand, and so on, those larger islands, issues are very similar because even in those islands, there are issues of remoteness and access. So, and there are solutions that they could share, as well as challenges that we can also work together on that will eventually, hopefully, bring resolution to some of these critical issues that we need to deal with still in our countries, as opposed to focusing on, I guess, the larger, more sexy issues. So we are looking at still infrastructural issues, still issues with basic access, still issues with digital inclusion, and still issues with content before we move on to the larger issues that are being debated at the IGF. So I do apologize for the audio issue that's not been resolved, and let's leave some time for some questions and some comments. So I hope you all heard my very rapid 10-minute or so presentation, and open the floor now for some questions. So I see that Ginger had put a comment on we need to look at advertising these workshops to make us all aware of the issues of small and developing states, and I think that's a very good point. The issue of advertising these workshops and getting the participation going has been a challenge. I think the small and developing states issues are very important to small and developing states, but don't seem to be recognized or seen as important by other countries. There is a challenge of getting other countries in the room, other stakeholders, and we're very happy to have other agencies and key stakeholders advertise and market the workshops so that we can get larger participation both remotely and in situ. Stephanie has asked, so the lack of participation of small, well, the thing is, the government of Trinidad and Tobago's comments would have been based on a government participation level. So I think that's a comment that you're quite right in that there may not be recognition by the governments of small developing states that other participants can be or are participating at other levels in civil society or in the academic and technical levels. And there needs to be governments and other stakeholders talking prior to getting to these workshops and synchronizing positions. We all have the same objective, but it tends to be compartmentalized based on each stakeholder or stakeholder group's views. It would be very useful in the small and developing states category to have these views aired before we attend the event, and obviously have a unified view that is discussed and agreed on beforehand. And I think that's been missing, and it needs to be fixed, to be totally frank with you. Ginger is the next one. Ginger has asked, how can SIDS issues be mainstream? I think this year, with regards to the Samoa meeting and the UN recognizing the year, there needs to be a way that beyond the circle of groups to discuss SIDS issues to get the SIDS issues mainstream into the international discussions. I think it's highly unfortunate, to be totally honest with you, that the SIDS global meeting, the SIDS summit, and the IGF are happening, as an example, at the same time. In this case, there'll be distractions from either one or the other. And even, I know there's one particular individual, I'll call her name, Andrew from Fiji, who has a challenge because she has to participate in both the IGF and the SIDS workshop. That was really a challenge for her. So how do we ensure that issues into internet governance and ICT are mainstreamed into the SIDS discussions? And how do we make sure that SIDS discussions are mainstreamed to the internet and IG discussions? On the other hand, it's a challenge. And maybe DiploFoundation, the CARICOM secretariats, the Secretary of the Pacific Community, and so on can help us with looking at trying to mainstream these things into other discussions and moving it forward. Okay. How many non-SIDS people are meeting in Bali? Well, to be totally frank with you, I think the majority of people participating in Bali were non-SIDS people. The reason being, the people who were from SIDS could not get to Bali, and it's as simple as that. They couldn't afford to be there. It was a challenge, and even getting people to participate remotely from SIDS is a challenge. So in the room, we had people who were interested, people who were invited, people who corralled it, and effectively, I would say about 60% to 70% of people in the room were from non-SIDS territories, and it wasn't volunteer participation. We marketed to them and they came to the meeting. Rochelle and Clark Hines. How can we adopt a more coordinated approach with respect to SIDS issues of the messaging in various fora? Right. So I referred to previously the zero draft document for the Samoa meeting, and in fact, ICT is mentioned quite and technology quite a lot in the document, and there are 7 mentions, I believe, of it, 6 or 7 mentions of it. Internet, however, is not specifically mentioned in that document. In chatting with my colleagues in the Pacific, the internet is seen as an ICT issue, and therefore it's an ICT discussion, and it may get a separate heading either out as an outcome of the meeting or pursuant to that meeting. But we are not at this point in the SIDS forum getting to the internet governance thing on the table specifically. We're getting ICT on the table, but not IG. And I think that's something that is going to be worked on by the participants in Samoa to try and push it forward, especially the Pacific participants who I'm in contact with. I'm not aware if we are working on the Trinidad and Tobago and Caribbean contingents and see if a similar threats can be made. But that would be a very good idea, I think, Shelley, and that we can have the overarching SIDS position being pushed by at least the Caribbean and Pacific islands. So I said, talk about Africa as well. I said the Comoros, Mauritius, Seychelles, and so on are considered to be Africa in the geographic space. So when we talk about SIDS, we talk about those SIDS from Africa. I'm not speaking about the African continent in this discussion, unfortunately. I'm speaking about the islands of Africa and in the oceans. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. So it doesn't. Can you ask it again? Yes, and I definitely think we can cover synergies between the 2 meetings. And I'm not aware of how the meeting in Samoa is going to roll out, if there's going to be civil society participation. But I think if there's going to be I know there's NGO participation, which I'm getting at, but it's going to be the NGOs who are involved with SIDS. So if there's a way that we can work with the NGOs who are going to be in some more for the meeting, perhaps we can bring the internet and ICT issues further to the front of the table. There's a way to do it. If you look at the zero draft document and you see where the ICT issues are mentioned, they're mentioned primarily in terms of investment as well as the access question. We can work with those NGOs who are going to be there to broaden the discussion, deepen the discussion into issues with internet governance as well. To D asked again, non-SIDS. I'm not sure, can you ask the question again? I'm not sure what the question is. Statistics on which issue? Austin is asking if SIDS are marginalized. Oh yes, definitely. I think that it's not because they are small countries. There are small countries around the world who are not marginalized, and I don't think it's because they're small as well, or not small. It relates to the size does relate to it. Economic power relates to it as well. Political power, obviously. What tends to happen is that in the small and developing states, their focus is not on issues that are necessarily globally. I don't use the word sexy, but they're not globally sexy at the moment. So the issues of infrastructure and access, and when I mean access to roads and water, those those issues are still not on the, for example, the OECD agenda. And I think that's where the marginalization happens, because the issues that are discussed at the OECD and the OECD forum are not issues that SIDS can relate to. However, at the UN, and the UN has recognized SIDS, so I can't say they've been marginalized, especially now in 2014. I would imagine that there's an opportunity to bring all the issues that need to be addressed onto the table this year. If there's no other year, so this year is the year to get it on the table. Also, D is saying that she supports the stats. There's no way that he stats for that. I learned from the Bali. So the people in Bali were people who I got the IGF ambassadors, the IGF ambassadors to bring in people to the room. So they were not necessarily SIDS. That's something that I'm not sure was clear. But yes, they were people from many other countries: New Zealand, Australia, Indonesia, Philippines, and so on in the room. And they weren't there for SIDS. They were there because they were interested in SIDS issues, but they weren't there representing SIDS. Stephanie is asking, how proactive are governments in SIDS? I get the impression that civil society and academia are the main movers. Wondering about government involvement compared to that. So I think that it differs. The governments in small and developing countries, for example, Singapore, which is still considered a SID on the UN list, are very proactive in issues with the internet and policy, as you would be aware. Malta as well, which is still on the list, believe it or not. So I think that in those scenarios, you'd find that there is some proaction or direct effect that they have made and can make. But of course, as you would know from being from Malta, I don't think that an issue is their peculiar situation as a small and developing state is what they focus on when they go to international meetings or when they go to international fora. They focus on the issue to Malta or to Singapore, to Trinidad and Tobago, or to Barbados. The fact that we can all speak together as small and developing states is something that I think is only now emerging amongst territories. We've had several fora before, and the discussions have been, compartmentalized on those issues in particular, but they haven't really reached out further and galvanized support amongst SIDS. Perhaps in 2014, given that the year of SIDS is here and governments will participate in some more, we may see something starting to emerge. I think that similar to what happened in WSIS in 2003 and 2005, we have particular movement around the SIDS this year. So this year could very well be a watershed year, a milestone year, and I'm hoping that we can move it forward beyond simply discussing in forum and going back home and not having it there alone and stuck in the forum. So as I was talking about Congo not being as present as Trinidad and Tobago. Well, I mean, each issue regarding each country is just because again, the LDCs, the lesser developed countries, are also under that UN umbrella, and the issues of LDCs as a whole, which includes several of the SIDS, is an even larger issue that needs to be dealt with. So yes, we have those challenges in that lesser developed country or less developed country discussion, and I agree with you that the other countries need to be considered in that area about power, politics, economic power, and so on. Do you agree that Australia was, yes, I mean, although it was only Cheryl Langdon or who was discussing it in that way, I do agree that if Australia starts to see itself as in some ways, as I said, I think we have achieved some level of support for the thinking. So we have Karen talking about sharing disparities of SIDS in the IGF and not be included. Oh yes, but that's so Karen, that is very important. That and you're glad you're raising that point. That I have noted that in the African IGFs and so on, you tend to have a low participation of or zero participation of SIDS in those IGFs, and it tends to be the larger African countries participating and making observations. So again, and given you're from the Comoros, Karen, I think that is a way to maybe take in front and ensure that you find a way to get Comoros and Seychelles and Madagascar and Mauritius and those countries there and present in any of the regional IGFs in Africa. Correct, the majority of the Commonwealth are in fact small island developing states. That is in fact true, and that is something that's been raised in the GAC on several occasions. And it's a recognition that, especially from the Commonwealth organizations, the Commonwealth Secretariat, the CTO, even ComNet, that's small island developing states, are in fact the majority of the membership. Shelley Clark Hines is saying the issue of SIDS is moved from the national forum. The answer of way to get our physical language that our needs. Exactly. So the lack of participation of SIDS in the fora, and only by it's always certain countries are there and saying the same things. In many cases, speaking on behalf of all the countries who are not there, it does need to reflect a larger view by having more countries being there and showing numbers as well. I think politically it's important, and one of the things we're doing, if I wear my GAC hat in ICANN, is deliberately trying to get more members into the GAC and at the meetings, so that even though let's say country X speaks the most from the SIDS territories, it doesn't matter if they speak the most, but when you look around the room, you can see more countries being there across the regions, across the geographic regions. So we want to see more Pacific countries there. We want to see more African SIDS countries there. We want to see more Indian Ocean SIDS there. And we want to see more Caribbean SIDS there. We're doing our very best to try and ensure that they get involved, certainly at opportunities when they can. For example, so London is a good example of a meeting that they'll be involved. Because London is so close to the cultural heart of the Caribbean, and there's basically a direct flight away, we tend to find that we can get Caribbean countries to come to London a lot easier. The Pacific, we've had a little challenge of getting them to come, but we think there's going to be a few more coming to London as well, more than before. And again, having some more voices at that meeting, it's a particularly landmark meeting. It's the 50th ICANN meeting. as a high-level government meeting, and having them there participating is useful. In addition to that, there's an at-large summit happening at the ICANN 50 meeting of with 150 at-large structures. These are organizations in the at-large advisory committee in ICANN are coming. And of them, I understand many of them will be from the Caribbean and Pacific. So that's very useful. I'm sure that will be something that we can take advantage of in London and at least report on that here, from the SIDS coming to London to stake their claim and to make their voices heard in these meetings. So Austin says, how many others from Trinidad are coming with you? Well, what we tend to do from Trinidad is we tend to ensure that where we can, we bring colleagues who are involved and can get the funding. Because it's a challenge to get funding to come to these meetings. So we do lobbying with ICANN to get support for colleagues. We do support our own colleagues who are trying to apply for fellowships and so on. And we write letters of support. We do various types of activities to ensure that where reasonably possible, we can get people to come and where there's funding available. So from Karim, a regional idea for is it for African SIDS, Karim, you're referring to? For Comoros, Mauritius, and so on? I'm not sure who you're referring to. That's I assume you're referring to that. All right, are there any more questions or comments? Yes, definitely. I think that's a very important point. The remote participation, having seen what happened in NETmundial and seeing how well it was received, and remembering the IGF issues, and although IGF does a very good job with it, I think that in this IGF coming up in Istanbul, there will be a concerted effort to not only, of course, have the remote participation as Ginger and the team has always been involved in, but also to promote it in such a way that you're going to get more remote hubs. I think the hubs issue is what really made that NETmundial meeting very intriguing. And that beyond people who are participating remotely, the individuals, seeing the hubs and seeing the major participation of in particular Brazilian hubs and the Indian hubs, kind of gave the meeting a different flavor and showed to everyone there, many for the first time, that this internet issue is a much larger issue than those in the room who were there. So I think it's very important to continue that momentum and have that exposed in other meetings moving ahead. And certainly the IGF in Istanbul to ensure that that momentum is carried over. So I think the idea of getting the hubs really going and cracking, and not just saying that the hubs are showing the hubs. I think that visible showing of hubs was very poignant and very moving to many people who did not understand that the remote hubs were participating so fully. Yes, having a virtual hub throughout the entire year, that sounds like a really intriguing concept, and maybe that's something we can take up as an issue for the next set of meetings coming up. Beyond 2014, it should be something that even this meeting coming up with some more, we could, I don't know if this is even possible from now, but have a remote hub looking at that meeting and trying to get IT and ICT and IG issues into the discussion. That's something that could be worth exploring, and perhaps something that we could have after this call, this conference, this webinar, we can take forward. Anyone else has any questions or comments? All right, so if there are no more questions or comments, I think that will be, all right, here we are. 2 more questions. Suggesting Michelle and Clark Hines, can we suggest particular capacity building or training for SIDS? Perhaps And since this is a DiploFoundation organized event, I'm wondering if there's a option for Steph or Ginger to weigh in, maybe referring to that topic. Perhaps Ginger or Steph can weigh in either on the mic or on chat. All right, so I'm seeing Ginger asking Shelly and me, so that's useful. So my take on it would be that I completely agree that there could be a focus on small developing states. I know, and I can't recall, maybe Ginger can recall the year, there was an ACP program that ran, and there were a lot of states participating in the program. We even had a workshop in Tobago focusing on the region, and we had quite a number of regional participants there. So I know it's been happening, and certainly it requires some level of funding and support, being intimately familiar with the Diplo situation, so to continue having. And yes, the funding is important. So the issue is the will is there, the content is available. I'm sure the participants are willing to participate. The issue is trying to get that similar kind of program going again. I believe you went to Africa, I believe you went to the Pacific. I can't recall, but you went to the Caribbean as well. So it may be something that we can. It's going to be going on 5 years since, if the D is right, 2010 sounds about correct. It's about 5 years since we had the last intervention, so it could be a opportune time to revitalize that thinking and perhaps go again with larger groups, given the situation that has emerged since then. So is there anything else from anyone? I think it's a good way to end the discussion on capacity building. So that'll really be something I'd like to see happen more often. All right, everyone. So thanks very much. And I do apologize for Windows and its nuances, and I will know better next time. I rely on my Chromebook going forward. So although I think my next doesn't move in Chromebook. So thank you very much for bearing with us in this challenging with the audio, and I'm glad to see it came back up. And sorry for moving so quickly, but I wanted to try and capture everything the time we had. So more quickly than I wanted to. Thanks very much, and I'm hopeful that we can edit the recording, maybe leave all that huge technical glitch, and maybe that's something you can help us with. So thanks again, and please feel free to send questions. I think my last slide has my contact information. There we go. So feel free to send any further questions or follow me or interact with me on social media, and I'm willing to continue collaborating, discussing, engaging, and debating when necessary with all my colleagues. And I hope to see you very soon, and whether it be London or otherwise, let us all chat and have discussions going. And given that we have the workshop in Istanbul, I really would like to see as many of you as possible attend, if you can, remotely. Don't forget, there's also remote participation, so you don't need to be hopping on a plane to get there. You can participate remotely. So thanks very much, and have a good morning, night, evening, day, wherever you are. Thanks very much, and it's over now for me.